Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. Another presentation on Non-Linear Existentialism, Kierkegaard, Buber, and Referential Knowledge, Creation of Truth. But this idea is basically what is truth and how is it created. This is very a cornerstone of philosophy along with the idea of being. And this one we're just going to be giving it, fleshing out as I believe it within the context of non-linear existentialism with the backdrop of existentialism, starting off with the sender receiver and the limitations between them. In order to understand truth, or for there to be a pretense or understanding that there could be truth, there has to be a relationship between the sender and the receiver. Sender would be the object that has truth, and the receiver would be the one that will be receiving the truth. Seminal within that is going to be the idea of a reference and variance. As has been brought up before, reference would be the idea of having something in order to be able to know that what something is or what it could be, deciphering or interpreting or giving out the information or receiving it, and variance is going to be changes within that message that's being sent out. And both of these are cornerstones of the idea of non-linear existentialism as is drawn out in the previous presentations. But you can look at the individual parts of the sender receiver. It's just going to be the transmission of energy and the reception of this energy, which is very important in the understanding of truth or interpretation of truth. Basically, the sender receiver limitations, there's going to be a lot of coexistent difficulties that lead to apparently not understanding the truth or not being able to give out information so someone else can understand the truth. For uncertainty is going to be basically a lack of knowledge, and that's going to be very important for the idea of a reference. How can someone understand if something is true or not if they don't have something to gauge it against? And for variance, it's going to be variance in the environment, meaning the information is coming to you, or your understanding of it, and also internal conditions, and that's going to be for the frequency amplitude modulation, among other things, that there's going to be variance or changes in the information that you receive or how it's processed. Then you have the idea of quantity and quality that I've mentioned before, where you have the external references and internal references. A quantity would be something that can be measured by something external to that which receives, and that would be called quantity or external reference, and quality is going to be an internal reference that other people do not understand or they don't know why it's occurring. And this is related to variance. So as we will be shown in the presentation, although such initial conditions can hamper the transfer of energy and information, therefore not understanding truth, these aspects can also improve the process. So objective and subjective. They're different from subject and object that I was talking about before. Subject and object in the previous presentation was about the idea of receiving and sending information, and for reference in that respect, if we're talking about spatially, the subject is the one that's receiving the information, and object is the one that's transmitting the information. More to the point of subjective and objective, objective would be truth, and subjective would be non-truth, meaning an objective is something that's unchangeable. If you can have a reference, that truth for that reference should not be changeable, because if it does change, then it leads to contradictions, then it's not going to be the truth. And subjective is going to be various levels of non-truth or changeability. References, that by which something is compared against and measured by. References are rated on how consistent or non-variable they are. This does not mean, and this is important to emphasize, a reference is truthful. It may be consistently wrong. So you can a consistent non-variable wrong, consistent non-variable right, and an inconsistent right and wrong. So for frequency amplitude modulation, that can actually cause your reference, which can be imbued within the patterns, cerebral patterns, to sometimes be right and wrong. But the thing is, it will hopefully show that this situation can change at the beginning, where they have no patterns per se in the cerebral hemisphere, very little. The inconsistency that's wrought by the frequency amplitude modulation may lead to a lot of not being able to bring about a variance, but over time the variability that is brought about by the frequency amplitude modulation will give you references that are more conducive to the truth, or the truth within the level of the individual that's receiving energy, and over time that the reference becomes fuller and fuller and closer to the truth. So the idea of Kierkegaard, overcome objective uncertainty with inwardness, and subjectivity, and God is subject, and this comes from his concluding on scientific postscript. And this is interesting. So the idea for him is that to overcome the uncertainty, objective uncertainty in the environment, you become inward. and also with the idea that he said this is brought about because God is subject. Then you go to Buber, and I and thou, I it, and then I thou. The idea I it is the individual, and the truth is within them, or perspective is within them, and I thou is inner relationships, or the betweenness of the individual with others. So this leads to a very apparent existential contradiction. Kierkegaard is the truth is inwardness, and Buber is the truth is betweenness, and then you got to basically try to figure out, is this a contradiction because it's essential reflections of how each individual looks at existentialism. And you also got to remember Soren Kierkegaard is considered one of the fathers of existentialism. So is he saying that truth is unique to the individual? And Buber later on in the 1920s and 30s was coming across with the idea that truth is betweenness. So how do we rectify this within the context of creation of truth, within the context of the references being offered? For non-linear existentialism, we actually believe in, well, as I'm presenting as referential knowledge, is basically that knowledge is not the individual facets within the environment that comes to the individual. It's how they relate to others. And you can read the definitions I'm giving it. But basically, if all the information coming to the individual is processed through the FAM processor, and it comes in that yes, each individual particle of quanta of information is being varied, but the important thing is that we get references between the individual information that comes in. So even though that there is going to be a variance as the information comes in, over time, the more and more information the person has, the betweenness, the unique relationships between them are what's important, not the individual quanta of information. So what happens is that even though there's going to be continual variance brought about by the FAM, that this will actually allow for the individual particles as how individual events that the person comes across and how they refer and relate with other things to get a stronger and stronger reference to things outside of themselves. So first the person's quite subjective or inward, and over a period of time through FAM, their reference or their truth becomes more and more objective because there's more and more being brought into themselves that is reflective of the environment. So non-linear existentialism, the truth is not due to the individual items but how they relate to the other aspects of the environment which are used to judge and create them. Or in other words, if everything was the same, nothing would exist. Without variance, individuals would not exist. So the FAM processor, first having frequency amplitude and frequency modulation for allow for binding of time, then you go to the idea of amplitude modulation where the information coming in is interpreted correctly based on the senses, but afterwards, because of the processing that occurs, because of the amplitude modulation, there's different amounts of energy that gets accorded to each information that comes in. That leads to somewhat of a variance, but as a backdrop of the patterns in the cerebral hemisphere, that in respect to them and in respect to the situation that the person's in the environment, become go towards better and better outputs for energy. And of course, this is an energy-related module, energy-related system. So the thing is that if those individual patterns decrease the overall cerebral energy, then they're not going to be as conducive to something that will increase it. This could be brought back to the idea of residual incongruencies and instantaneous incongruencies. So, conclusion one, objective subjective references reflect a continuum in changeability as well as the concepts of idealism and realism. In this context, again, also one would be the idea of uncertainty, which is key to this. It's an idealism. There is absolutely no uncertainty. Everything is truth. Everything is known is what it seems to be. And that would be considered objective. Symbolism would be the idea for idealism, is that because you have uncertainty so much reduced, you can say that you would have that this form is the idealness of what we have, but then you have realism where you have the uncertainty and also the idea that you're building your basically building your forms, building your references that you're comparing things to. So the thing is, for subjective references, at the beginning that you're building your own references, you're building your own truth, creating your own truth within the backdrop of the society that you're in. And the more and more you interact, you can still be a subject with your fam. However, over a period of time, you're becoming more relating to other things, other individuals in the environment, and that allows you to be more towards of realism, so you can have both things occurring at the same time. An objective reference can appear to be subjective if viewed by a subjective reference. So the idea is that they might be objective references, but if it's being viewed by someone looking at it, they're going to bring their own variance, and perhaps that their reference isn't fully developed, that it's going to be actually looking subjective instead of actually being objective. Therefore, the ideal state of God appears to be an uncertain objective, because Kierkegaard views God as a subject. So God as an idealistic statement or idea is in itself has to be perfect, but the thing is, because the individual is looking at God, God becomes a subject, and then becomes something that has to be created or formed. So the idea of going back to existentialism. The other one, referential knowledge, is able to overcome the apparent existentialistic contradiction by transforming inwardness into objectivity through the process of non-linearity. The changeable nature of fam allows for the formation of a more stable, truthful internal reference. So the idea is beforehand you have inconsistent right and wrong in fam, but the thing is that even though it's still operating, at least a consistent right, which would be the cerebral patterns, which would be the idea of a better formed truth. So again, we have a truth, the background, who we are, our patterns, and the thing is that as it develops, as it becomes more and more full, as it more realizes more of the betweenness is happening external to them, and it brought inside, that it becomes from inconsistency to more consistency. So conclusion number 3, an individual becomes a person when non-linearity, which at first separated them from the environment on a physical level. Again, the idea that because we have so many different energies coming at different rates, and we have the idea of having frequency being modulated so it comes at the same rate, so we can understand the environment in a certain rate, which allows us to understand data, understand how what's going on around us. That over a period of time, that linearity, which would be non-linear to the external, allows it to create ourselves, because we're going to be actually having differences. Again, that's a reference, difference from the outside, but that difference is not going to be overcoming the linearity that's occurring within our pattern. So you have something that's non-linear on one side, the fam, the frequency modulation, and another one allows us to understand the references, creating a truth which is realistic or within the context of where we are. So the idea, the ability of non-linear increases the ability to share common beliefs. And this process works through reducing residual incongruencies, RI20, hopefully, and however instantaneous incongruency will remain. It would have to remain because a certain level of stress is necessary in order for the person to function. So overall, the idea is that non-linear existentialism, like existentialism, is the idea of referential knowledge. The idea is that we create our own truths within the context, and these perhaps are not ideal truths, because again, the energy that comes into us is going to be at a certain set, and even if we have tools and such to expand our awareness of things, the thing is that the information, the situations that we present ourselves as human beings are going to be in the short range of the full spectrum of energy. So even though we can understand things that are outside of our spectrum of energy, what is going to be unique to us or important to us is going to be in that narrow. So we create truth within that. We go from going from a non-linear state to something that's more and more linear to the outside, but we still are operating through the fam. So the thing is that because we were to get more set and set patterns, that the tide from being more non-congruent to congruent occurs, even though that we still have the incongruency that occurs through instantaneous congruency through the fam processor. But over a period of time, we can go from being quite subjective to being more objective. So the thing is that those things do operate at the same time. So when we have the idea of a contradiction, apparent contradiction with Kierkegaard and with Buber, they are basically the same thing, but they look at it for a context. For Kierkegaard, he was basically going the inwardness allows us to separate ourselves from the incongruencies that occur outside, and we create our own congruencies. But over a period of time, as Buber was saying, is that we start understanding the in-betweenness, the betweenness of the information we bring in, and that betweenness is very important, that we understand and also accept it, and understand that's part of who we are and what we need to do in order to create ourselves. So again, with this one is just the idea of bringing up the very importance of referential knowledge, that the variance that's created by the fan process or non-linear existentialism allows us actually to become closer and closer to our environment, because it allows us to get outside of the very strict linear situations that we may be in. It allows us to be open-minded and allows us to create a better, fuller truth. I thank you very much for your time. Take care. Goodbye.